We have had 1 week of ASUN conference play, and you know what time it is. We got to overreact. It is Overreaction Tuesday, getting ready for another week of ASUN men's and women's basketball. I'm William Hall. Welcome to the ASUN Gameday podcast, and it was a great first 2 days of conference play. New Year's Day, January 3rd. We got all our teams back in the mix. We've got some ideas about who could be, who could not be. And again, we're just all taking it in. 2 games down. We know everything. We've got it all laid out. So let's just hop right into it. We've been talking about Austin Peay and Lipscomb for the last few weeks of being teams that are good. So there's no real surprise that they are 2-0. Those two teams have, this is men's basketball, have been, I guess, in a groove for the past few weeks, going on a month really for Austin Peay. And I think that just kept rolling in the conference play. They are 2-0. But let's talk about a team that, I'll be honest, myself, I didn't see it coming. Central Arkansas, UCA, 2-0. They haven't started out 2-0 in conference play since the 2021-22 season, which was the program's first in the ASUN. They had a game with FGCU that I think really showed that the team has the fight. They kept clawing, kept going in that game. They got the win. And then they took care of business against Stetson. Now, the Bears have Bellarmine and EKU coming up on their schedule. I would call those winnable games. I think those are games. They're on the road, but I think the UCA can get those games and put those extra numbers in the win column. They have not had a 3-0 conference play start since that program has been Division I. So the game against Bellarmine, which is the first one coming up this week, obviously can be a history-making game. And then against EKU, if they leave Richmond and they're 4-0 in conference play, we may need to be having a different conversation about the Bears. And I'm just being honest. A 4-0 UCA team, I don't think anybody would have seen that coming. That would match their win total from last season in conference play. Just an amazing start for John Schultz and the team. But, again, they got to get through Bellarmine first. Then they got to get through EKU on the road. Another team that's taking a road trip to Kentucky this week, North Alabama. And I know how 0-2 may look, which, again, overreaction time is not terrible. But I think the Lions will be fine. I think that loss to Stetson in the opener, they did break an 11-game home winning streak that UNA had in Florence. And I think the way that game ended, the way that loss ended up happening, I think that carried over a little bit into Saturday's game with FGCU. I think it lingered, and I think it kind of affected things. And that FGCU game kind of got out of hand from UNA. But I think they can get back on track. But they're going on the road against a Bellarmine team that's has not looked bad this year. And the EKU team that I talked about them last week about them wanting to get that game against Queens and the game against West Georgia. They also had both of those teams fought on the road. Bellarmine and EKU were both in Charlotte and in Carrollton, Georgia last week, playing Queens and West Georgia. And I think that at 0-2, both of those teams are hungry. So you've got a UNA team that's 0-2, a team that was just in the ASUN championship final, a team that probably has high aspirations, and they've earned it based on what they did last year. Coming into this year, we're thinking that UNA is going to be in the mix at the top. So 0-2 going on the road against 2 hungry teams that are looking for wins themselves. So that's a recipe for some good games. But I really want to see if UNA can get it back and get it back together and get back in their winning ways. And of course, with EKU and Bellarmine, all 3 of those teams we're talking about looking for the same thing. But UCA and UNA going on the road to Kentucky, 2 teams in different positions. But, again, got to shout out Central Arkansas. On the women's side, there are a lot more teams that were 1-1 on the women's side after the first 2 games of the season. So we got 3 2-0 teams on the women's side. So let's talk about those 3 undefeated teams. First, we've got EKU. They were great in the opener against West Georgia. They were excellent in that game against Queens. They won that game against the Royals 103-49. They shot 56% from the field, ended up with 5 double-digit scores. I mean, they really dominated down low. They out-rebounded the Royals 48-31 and outscored them 44-12 in the paint. That's a recipe for wins if I've ever seen one. And EKU undoubtedly is going to be a team that you're going to have to be looking out for this season. I think already Greg Todd team has been in the mix at the top of the conference in the standings in non-conference play, and they just have rolled into conference action with, again, that game against West Georgia was a great game, but they really put the pedal to the metal against Queens and showed that they can be dominant, and that's what it's going to take to win this conference. Speaking of winning this conference, another team that is undefeated after the first weekend, the FGCU Eagles, reigning champions, the gold standard of ASUN women's basketball over the last decade plus. They had a close game in the opener against North Alabama. I will also admit that I didn't necessarily think that FGCU was going to come out this weekend 2-0, and that was more so about that first game against North Alabama, and not so much that FGCU disappointed me. I think I just didn't necessarily think that it would be a close game, and obviously kudos goes to North Alabama for bringing the fight to FGCU in that opener. But looking at that game and looking at the way Stetson took care of business UCA took care of business on the road at Stetson, I kind of was looking at Saturday's game, the FGCU Central Arkansas game, as a game that Central Arkansas may be able to control. I was wrong. FGCU, again, kind of reminded people and myself that, hey, this tournament is not going to physically go through Alico Arena this year, but in mind and spirit, FGCU is still the team to beat at the top of ASUN women's basketball as they have been. And I think the Eagles just had to kind of just remind people, hey, don't forget about us. And right now, last but not least, Austin Peay, I think, is the hottest team in the conference right now. 6-game winning streak after going on the road, beating Jacksonville and North Florida to improve to 7-0 on the road this season. Now, I think, though, the Govs may have one of the toughest slates coming up this week with their schedule. They have FGCU and Stetson coming at F&M Bank Arena in Clarksville, and I think those are two teams, when you're looking at teams that we kind of thought going into the season were going to be at the top. You talk about your FGCUs, you talk about your Stetson, your Central Arkansas. I think with those two teams, FGCU and Stetson, coming in, and Austin Peay has positioned themselves, although some people may not have thought this is where they would be. I'm sure Brittany Young and her team felt like they would be challenging at the top of the conference, and here they are. I think when those two teams like that come into play on your court, you got to get those games, and it's very similar to looking back to last week, the FGCU Central Arkansas game. I think that UCA, despite losing that game to FGCU, they're going to be in the mix. They're going to be in the hunt. I don't think that team is going anywhere. The Sugar Bears are going to be around. So having that head-to-head win for FGCU could be huge. Same thing for Austin Peay. You got FGCU and Stetson, teams that we are assuming are going to be in the mix. Having a win against those teams, they're just having that in your pocket. It may come down to breaking some ties, getting that first-round bye, jumping straight to Vistar for the tournament. Though these are the games that are very early in January, the third game of the season, second game of the season, that you get that win, and then when things are getting into crunch time, you can fall back on that. So I think these are it's early, but all these games are important. Every game matters. I know all 12 of our teams on the men's and women's side, everybody's making the tournament, but I think it's very important that you just get those wins because you want to be seated high. You want to get the favorable matchup. You want to get the bye. You want to not have to play on Tuesday and jump all the way to Thursday's game. So I think that these games now obviously are going to impact things later, and teams, you got to get them when you can get them. So a lot of exciting games that have already taken place, a lot of exciting games around the corner. So we're going to take a quick break and be right back and talk about some of our weekly award winners on ASUN men's and women's basketball.
Welcome to the Atlantic Sun, where heart-pounding moments are born and where champions rise above, where speed defies limits and precision finds its mark, where millions of fans nationwide cheer for excellence, determination, and fairness, where public, private, and faith-based schools compete side by side, fostering sportsmanship and unity. From the beaches to the mountains, the Atlantic Sun is the destination.
We are back. Let's dive into some players of the week. First, on the men's side, Shelton Williams-Dryden. Look, this man's game is consistent. It's not sporadic. He's going to come out every week and give you what he's going to give you. I just talked about him last week and said that West Georgia couldn't really catch anybody off guard because when you got Shelton Williams-Dryden on your team and on the floor, he's an impact player. Took home his third Player of the Week honor after leading the Wolves to that 2-0 start in conference play with back-to-back double-doubles. Another team, Austin Peay, who we've already talked about on the men's side, newcomer of the week, Colin Parker, averaged over 20 points and over 6 rebounds per game in wins against Jacksonville and North Florida in Clarksville for the Govs. On the women's side, we had a double-up. Joe Vaz, the EKU player and newcomer of the week, started ASUN play with 14 points and 9 rebounds against West Georgia, then followed up with a 17-point, 10-rebound double-double against Queens in that game we've already mentioned that the Colonels were in complete control. And our freshman of the week from Lipscomb, Hope Counts, averaged 11 points and 5.5 rebounds while shooting 53% from the floor to help the Bisons to an opening weekend split. That was last week. Let's look ahead to next week. Well, this week, should I say. The next round of games, this Thursday, this Saturday. Conference play rolls on. Some key games to take a look at. On the women's side, first, FGCU at Austin Peay. Kind of already talked about this game a little bit. The two undefeated records matching up. These two teams have played quite a bit over the last 3 seasons. They've met once during the regular season and once in the tournament. Obviously, FGCU has won several tournament championships in a row. So they've obviously won those tournament contests and those regular season matchups. 6-0 the Eagles are against the Govs. So Austin Peay looking to kind of break that trend, get the program's first win against FGCU, and try to get it done at home. And also on Saturday, EKU at Central Arkansas. Now, both teams play on Thursday with EKU at North Alabama. UCA hosts Bellarmine. There's been 10 games played between these two programs over the past 15 years. The series is split right down the middle with 5-5. But UCA has won the last 3 meetings. I think with EKU playing well, as we mentioned also, UCA got a split on the first weekend. I think this has a recipe of 2 teams, as we've talked about, I feel like are going to be in the mix. So could be a game that's really important, as we mentioned, to come into and have it in your back pocket when it's coming time to seed that tournament when March gets here. On the men's side, Thursday, Lipscomb at Stetson. 2 longtime conference members and rivals. 2 programs that scream ASUN basketball. Also our last 2 ASUN tournament champions. There have been 46 games played in this all-time series. The Bisons lead 27-19, and they've also won 3 of the last 4 meetings that have taken place in DeLand. So these 2 teams face off Thursday in the Edmond Center. Let's see what we have going on in 2026. And then West Georgia at North Florida. Another game that's happening on Thursday. This matchup is less about history and the matchups and all-time series. There's only been 1 game played between these 2 programs, which was last year, West Georgia's first in the conference. I think this game, to me, is more about teams trying to find their identities. The Wolves looking to continue to put a stamp on the fact that they are a team to be reckoned with in the ASUN. In North Florida, the Ospreys, they're looking to put an end to their losing streak. And they've been a tough team to beat in UNF Arena. We'll see what we get. But I think both of these teams are trying to prove something at this point of the season. And I get it, it's 1 week in, but if you're UNF, you still want to get those wins. You want to build that resume back up. You want to get back going. And historically, like I said, UNF has been tough to beat at home. With West Georgia coming in, kind of riding the high and been one of the better teams in the men's side this season, I think that this will be a game that if UNF can get this game, can start building that momentum for them moving forward through the season. Now it's time for the power rankings. And I know this is always interesting. I get funny looks when I lay out my top 6s, but I took a break last week. But I'm back this week. Let's go with the men. Let's go men's basketball first. Number 6, I got FGCU. Look, they're in the mix. Enough said. Number 5 is Queens. I think Queens is a team that there are a lot of expectations with that team. I don't want to say that I am out on Queens. I just would like to see more. And what more can you give besides win? I don't know, but that's where I'm at. I gotta see it. I gotta see it. 4 is West Georgia, and I think because the consistency of West Georgia has been there longer, and I get it. It's the matchups and who you've been playing, but you play the schedule, you win the games, and I think West Georgia is rolling right now. Number 3, speaking of rolling, Central Arkansas. They've jumped up a whole lot for me. I think that I was very impressed by what they were able to do because, admittedly, like I said before, I didn't have them pictured as being 2-0 when we were out of the first week of conference play. But here they are. They're number 3. 2-1, it's not very – it's a little anticlimactic. It's just which one is which. I'm going with the longer winning streak. So 2 is Lipscomb and 1 is Austin Peay. I think those teams have just maintained that play. They're continuing to keep it going, and until something changes, my mind won't change. Women's basketball. Number 6 is Stetson. They did drop a little bit. And number 5 is Jacksonville. I think the thing that I wanted to see a little bit more out of Stetson, and I think that I felt Austin Peay was going to really give Jacksonville a strong fight in that game last week. Number 4, Central Arkansas. Again, I think I got to knock them a little bit for the loss to FGCU, who is number 3 right now. My power rankings, not the standings. 2 is EKU. I think I've enough said about EKU. They just are what they are. The Colonels are solid, and number 1 team on the women's side should be no surprise right now. Austin Peay. They got a test coming. FGCU and Stetson coming to town. Let's see if they can keep it going. But I think right now they are the hottest team in the conference, men or women. I think Austin Peay is really finding their groove right now. That women's basketball team is really looking solid. This week's matchup of the week. Going men's basketball. Queens, who I want to see more from, at Jacksonville, who I do want to see more from. I think this is a game that it should be exciting. It should be. I think that it will be. The Dolphins are putting their 3-0 home record on the line and looking for their first conference win of the season. So that's also, I think, added more to that. They haven't lost at home. They are 0-2 in conference play, losing those games on the road against Austin Peay and Lipscomb. And Queens is looking to keep the momentum going after they had a 2-point win against EKU. They won by 22 against Bellarmine. So the Queens opener was tighter than I would have thought it would have been. So when I say I want to see more, I think I kind of look to that EKU game. Again, there's 2 sides to everything, right? That you can say, or I can say that I want to see more out of Queens, but at the same time, can fully acknowledge that that's just because that EKU team isn't a pushover. And none of our teams are going to – you're not going to step into any of our games and just look at the team across from you and not be on your game and think that they're not going to bring it to you no matter what name is on the front of the jersey. So I think that that's what I want to see Queens be able to just go out and get it done. That was a good game, the game against EKU. The Bellarmine game, it was in the Royals' favor. These teams, going back to Jacksonville and Queens, they play, to me, very different styles of basketball. Jacksonville wants to grind it out, slow the game down, be physical. Queens, on the other hand, they're shooting, they're playing fast. They want to pile on the points. Last weekend, the Royals averaged 94.5 points per game in those 2 games. Now, a lot of that came against Bellarmine, but I think that is a recipe for an exciting game because one of those teams is going to have to come out of its comfort zone. Either Jacksonville is going to have to speed up and play a little faster and shoot a lot more than they would normally like to do. They're going to have to make them. I don't know if you want to get into a shootout with Queens or if Jacksonville can kind of dirty that game up and slow it down and make Queens grind it out with them. Well, then you can see if the physicality of Jacksonville, which is their identity and the way they've played, maybe it throws Queens off a little bit, and then you've got an upset. Don't know if you can necessarily call that game an upset, but we'll say it's an upset because I would imagine coming into this, the expectation probably would be that Queens comes into Swisher and gets that win. So, but I think Jacksonville, despite, and this is over the past couple of years with that Jordan Mincy team, they kind of show up in those games where you don't really expect them to win, when they're not predicted to win, when you would think they would be the underdogs, and then they just show up and they're like, oh, next thing you know, they're in the conference tournament semifinals. They find a way to win, and I think it's that gritty way they play. It gets you wins, and it keeps you in games, and it keeps you hanging around, and I think that's what they're going to need to do. I don't think they win that game if it's high scoring. I think if it's in the 50s or 60s, Jacksonville has a chance to get it done. But Jacksonville has owned this matchup the past few years. They're 3-1 against Queens. They haven't played in Swisher since January of 2024. They split their last two meetings when they did play in Charlotte. So I think this game, I've got my eyes on it. It's the matchup of the week. Queens at Jacksonville. Let's put that in the book. Let's see what we got. But we are locked in. We're only 1 week down. We got a lot more ASUN men's and women's basketball action to come. We're just getting started. It's the ASUN Game Day podcast. I'm William Hall, signing off. See you next time.